Tate's father is really the founder of Tateism, and that's a word that both Tate and his father actually use. The Tates really look up to their father. Their father tweeted a lot of misogynistic, homophobic things in his time. Maybe there was a lack of role model for them.
Off the camera conversation I had with Tate in the early days, he was talking about his dad, and he said, you know, my dad left my mum to go around the world and play in chess tournaments and loads of women all around the world. And I thought he was a fucking G for that. I think like if my dad left my mum to go and sleep with numerous women all around the world, I don't know if I'd necessarily have that kind of response. But I think it was the only way he could keep this image of his dad as this amazing man, this hero.
I just saw them like walking off with their like tight like shirts, their muscles like bulging out, like smoking a cigar and like shoving reporters out of the way while they go to face their trafficking indictment. If that's what like masculinity is, then masculinity is just basically a ridiculous cartoon performance to other men that I literally want nothing to do with. The other lie that lots of young men are being told by these men is that women will like you more if you do that. If you're getting into this because you think like chicks are gonna like you if you act like that, like it's not gonna work. You know, they will laugh at you.
Matt and Jamie, hello. Welcome to Politics Joe. How would you guys like to introduce yourselves? Tell us who you are.
My name's Jamie Tahsin. I'm a journalist, documentary filmmaker, and just wrote a book with this lovely man here, Matt Shea.
Yeah, I'd say all the same applies to me, except my name's Matt Shea, not Jamie Tahsin.
Two brilliant journalists, lovely men, and authors of Clown World, 4 years inside Andrew Tate's manosphere. Would we say this was kind of a natural conclusion, always a part of the documentary you guys made about him? How did the two intersect with each other?
I think like when we were making the documentaries, particularly the editing process, we felt pretty limited by the confines of television, right? You've got like a really limited amount of time that you can have story on screen. And when we were covering Andrew Tate, it was one of these stories that like became more and more significant and like culturally important while we were telling it, but also just more insane and surreal and weird. And a lot of that wasn't able to make it into the films, but we always felt it was like a really, really important part of the story and we wanted to get it out there. So a book seemed the perfect way to do it. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the conclusion because Tate's story still isn't over and every week there's new developments with him, new allegations, new charges. But it felt like something that we had to do at the end of our reporting, I think.
Matt, the book starts with you being punched in the face.
Yeah, definitely. So that was a funny story. Basically, we did our first kind of slightly combative interview with Tate in the morning, and Jamie had the genius idea of doing it over a chess match. So Tate would have the like illusion of superiority because he's a chess master, basically. And then we asked him some quite difficult questions, and then he said, "Oh, why don't you come film me sparring in the boxing gym afterwards?" Which we thought would be good B-roll. That might be an inside baseball term for just like shots of Andrew Tate boxing, and then he was like, "Put some gloves on, you're boxing me." And that was essentially my first encounter with the kind of raw message at the heart of Andrew Tate's philosophy, which is, you know, the more violent, the more physically dominant man is the better man, basically.
When you... Well, just tell me what you're thinking in that moment then, because obviously...
I'm thinking, no, the smarter, nicer man is the better man.
But is there something quite primal? Like he's a former professional kickboxer, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not just a case of, oh, let's play around and have it. Like if you go into that situation, it's, oh, I'm just going to get beaten up right now. Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about boxing. I don't know like how many like rounds there are. Like I didn't even know about tapping out. I didn't know when it was going to stop.
Yeah.
At one point, I did request to fight someone my own like weight size, and he was like, "Okay, yeah, you can fight this guy." But he was huge.
He was massive. He was your height, but probably
he was my
like
height.
twice the width.
Yeah, twice the width. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
a girthy man.
Yeah, and actually, that guy really. That was the wrong call because at least Andrew Tate has some media awareness. He's like, I can't knock this journalist out because that would probably be bad. But this guy didn't really seem to have that.
I feel like Tate's MO with that was like showing you how much better he was than you at something, right?
At boxing, but it's like, I never questioned it. Do you think that that's part of my interview process for the BBC?
I feel like the other guy's MO was like, I actually want to knock this guy out.
Yeah.
Which was like slightly more terrifying. Tate was like, I want to hit you in the face a few times. This guy was like, I have a point to prove.
So the most crucial, the thing where I really understood the way these men's minds work was when he was punching me and I lost consciousness for a second and I was like, can we stop? And he was like, he came up to me and told me, so you asked me to stop there. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, if this was a street fight, could you ask the other person to stop? And I was like, no. And then I began to realize, he's like, well, that's like the way the world works, right? Is, violence can come at any time. You got to remember, these guys are paranoid. Tate says he doesn't like coming to London because he's afraid he's going to get stabbed by someone. It really feeds into that kind of right-wing paranoia that like the world is dangerous, and there's crime everywhere, and you got to always be ready to fight, protect your woman.
Yeah. Okay. So there's so much there I want to get into. Okay, let's just dial back a second and go. What was the pretense of you being in Romania? Why were you there? And I guess actually says he doesn't like coming to London. He can't right now, right? He's under house arrest.
Yeah,
so it's not actually an option for him. But tell me why you guys were there. What it was that Tate was offering that you participated in, and we've kind of skipped ahead here, but the package of masculinity that as a part of that he's kind of offering to other people.
Yeah, sure. So it was late 2019 when we got an email from a colleague and friend called Lexi Rose. And basically her friend's younger brother had paid £5,000 to join something called the War Room, which was essentially Andrew Tate's paid for masculinity network. You pay a lump sum of money, you get added to Telegram groups with other War Room members, and you also get to go to these like in-person events with the Tate brothers, with War Room leadership. And it was really marketed at a slightly older demographic than some of Tate's other courses because it costs £5,000, but it was typically like 18 to 30-year-olds and then a few older, typically divorced men who kind of joined. And we were kind of immediately interested in that. Tate at that time wasn't really famous. He had like 50,000 Instagram followers, but he had this like very, very devoted following. So the people that did follow him were willing to hand over money, spend time traveling the world. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, this looks interesting. It's like cult-like masculinity. So I reached out to Tate and he was very, very, very responsive. I think at this time he was getting little to no media interest and he wanted us to come and cover his lifestyle in Romania. He was very, very reluctant for us to film whatever was happening with the War Room, but over a period of about 6 months to a year, we stayed in contact, regularly spoke, and he eventually invited Matt to go out and do something called The Test. And The Test was essentially an event that he was putting on in Romania for War Room members to come out and have their masculinity tested. Didn't tell us anything more about it. He just said, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be mafia shit. It's going to be like a game show on steroids. You have to come and do it. And then COVID hit, which caused some serious delays. Very difficult navigating that with someone who doesn't believe in COVID. But we eventually managed to get to Romania, and that's essentially what we were there for. Tate offered us, I think it was 3 days with him in Romania, going around his house, meeting his brother, getting a bit of a taste of his life. And then we headed off into the mountains of Transylvania for Matt to embark on the test. And
discover himself.
Yeah, exactly.
When you guys were talking to him, I mean, because this kind of predates the colossal fame, there's two angles to this, which is just his personality. What is he like, and what was he like when you were talking to him? But second of all, I feel like the Andrew Tate now would be far less receptive to a BBC film crew getting that level of access, that level of immersion, and for want of a better phrase, kind of liberal media access. He's kind of defined himself now in opposition to people like you. So talk me through that dynamic at the time. Was it just attention, media activity?
Well, he had a sense of invincibility, I think, because he hadn't yet been properly investigated. And the thing that Jamie's not saying is Jamie was the first one to really question whether he might be doing more criminal things. So Jamie always had this theory that he was potentially using the lover boy method, which is a form of manipulation to traffic women into the sex trade. And that was one of the other reasons we went there, was to simultaneously investigate that and also participate in the test. But yeah, he had this sense of invincibility. The more attention he got, the more famous he got, the more money he made by selling courses. What he didn't expect was for us to investigate him to that level.
Okay.
I think he was still at like his rage bait level of engagement as well, where he kind of knew that if he put out really extreme messaging that he would get some kind of response. Yeah. And to be honest, I think he thought that we would be a part of that without, as Matt said, doing any actual investigating and asking any difficult questions. I remember the first meeting we had with him was in this kind of like faux hipster cafe in Shoreditch, and he like pulled up in his McLaren, mounted the pavement, blocked the bit outside, and he said to us like, I know this is going to be a hit piece, but the question is it a hit piece I want? Which I thought was like quite telling. Like,
well, his exact words were, you can sit there editing your film, jerking your little cock and making a hit piece. I don't care. I rule the internet.
Yeah.
So
He said your editor.
He's a poet.
Our editor was a woman.
Your editor can sit around jerking his cock, and we were like, oh, Martha might struggle with that, but we'll see.
But anyway, that he didn't care. He really didn't, and that is something that we should be worried about. If people like this aren't afraid of the media, aren't afraid of journalists, then we really need to question why that is.
Okay, so let's dig into that then, because if what you're doing is just a grift, if it's a performance, then I guess the train of logic goes that it doesn't matter if the media is like ripping you to pieces, because at the end of the day, it's publicity for whatever. It may or may not be a Ponzi scheme, but essentially, if you're peddling something that costs thousands of pounds, the more it's being covered in places like the BBC, that's just net positive for you, perhaps?
Unless that coverage actually uncovers new things about you, that new truths that could damage your reputation in the eyes of people. Before that film, no one had actually interviewed any of the women who alleged that he raped and abused them, which he denies. But we gave a voice to those people. We also explained how his pyramid scheme works. And that now if young men are Googling Andrew Tate, they may see his stuff. They probably will if they look on TikTok. But hopefully some of them also see our film and the surrounding journalism that us and others like us have done. Now, if they search on TikTok, there's a much lower chance of them encountering our documentary. And that's another issue, is the media that we do, what people call the mainstream media, or what I just think of as the media, is not as present in those social media channels that young people are looking at.
Yeah,
I think related to that as well, we spend a lot of time in the media thinking about platforming and whether we're giving someone the right to, have a place on the BBC when actually that could cause more damage. But like I said, when we first reached out to Tate, he had 50,000 Instagram followers. 2 years later, he had millions, was the most watched man in YouTube. He'd had no media coverage. That wasn't how he got famous. I think we're very quick in the media to big ourselves up and think we have the ability to put someone on a national stage, but that's not really true anymore. He used Instagram, TikTok, Twitter to do that long before the media really started interacting with him. So the question of whether you're giving him a platform, no, he has a platform. He's massively famous and the media has played no part in it. What the media then needs to do is actually try and hold him a little bit accountable, ask difficult questions, do some investigating. It's not about just interviewing Andrew Tate, as lots of media pundits have done. We talk about Tucker Carlson and Piers Morgan in our book and the way in which they interviewed him. That's something I don't think we ever would have done. But this onus that we always place on should you give someone a platform is becoming, I think, less and less relevant in this era of social media fame.
Yeah, and it was also part of the kind of scheme for him, right? Was having this army of people creating TikTok edits, fan cam edits, was it's a way of kind of gaining greater access and demonstrating your value and validity to other members of the war room or other people associated with Tate. If you produce some kind of 7-second fan cam that gets millions of views, it's brilliant, and you're kind of demonstrating your loyalty. Tell me, we've touched on it, Matt, you've said some really interesting things about masculinity already. Tell me what you guys understood to be the sort of the ideas, the version of masculinity that he was offering with people gaining access to the war room. What was it that he was sort of advocating?
I think there's nothing novel about the type of masculinity that Tate is advocating or saying that he has the secret to. If you pay him, he can give it to you. It's the same kind of masculinity that we've grappled with our whole lives. It's the masculinity that's fed to us through video game characters, through James Bond movies. The idea that, we should be, other men should fear us, women should love us, that we should be dominant, you should be richer than other men. All these things that, the only difference is that whereas as you mature and kind of learn to grapple with that and realize that can be damaging, Tate is saying, no, double down on that fear you have, that insecurity you have, the fear of other men, the desire to be more loved by more women, to have more access to wealth and fancy cars and all that stuff. Double down on that, because you are shit. You are a brokey if you don't have those things. And really wrenching that insecurity open and filling it with his marketing.
Mm.
He's obsessed with status signaling as well. I think that's a huge part of it. The reason he thinks you should acquire all of these things is normally just to show that you're a higher status to other men.
Oh my God, exactly. For example, right, if I was to say to you, if you were to ask me, if I had a fancy sports car and you were to ask me why I had it, I would probably deny that I'm doing it to signal to other men that I'm better than them and I'm more of an alpha male than them, because that's fucking embarrassing, right? But Andrew Tate will literally say, I have this sports car as a status signal to other men. I'm bragging to other men about that, you know?
You used to say billionaires don't want yachts. They get them to let the world know that they are billionaires. Like, I don't actually want these things. I don't want any of this stuff, but I have to get it to show I'm a man. It's like there's a deep-rooted insecurity at the base of all of it.
I'm so glad you guys have mentioned this. There's a quote from the book, and there are many others, but on this point, right, Tate could use this notion to motivate men to achieve good in their lives and their communities, but in his world, combat and violence are the purest form of conquest, while women and money are the most important. And this idea that ultimately that you're performing masculinity for other men. And actually it's quite a sort of a feminist argument, right? That actually the patriarchy harms men in a way that it also harms women, where you're sort of convinced into thinking or believing that you have to signal your superiority, your dominance to other men at the same time. And I find that dynamic really interesting, because on the face of it, a lot of what Tate says is, you know, this is how you get a 10 out of 10 girlfriend. This is how you get a worldie as a girlfriend. But actually a great deal of it is about demonstrating your superiority to quote unquote inferior beta, whatever you want to call them, other blokes.
Yeah. And why are young men so desperate to do that? It's because they're afraid of other men, because they feel insecure and weak. And that is not something that we should be dealing with by saying, yeah, no, you are weak. You need to do all this stuff. And yeah, I think another interesting thing about that whole dynamic is it does essentially, well, Tate is the caricature of that. If you really obsess over that, you do become this walking caricature of a man who's so afraid and insecure of his masculinity that he's wearing like tight-fitting, stupid shirts with his like muscles bulging out with a waxed chest, walking around literally smoking cigars. Like, this guy is a cartoon character. I mean, that's what happens if you don't deal with these emotions properly, you know?
What do you think of that, Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. Like, Tate he's kind of the visualization of what a lot of 12-year-old boys might want to be. But what's different, I think, that Matt articulated is most people grow up, they mature, and they realize, actually, I don't need to signal to all these men that I'm better than them. I just need to be fulfilled and confident in my own life, whether that's becoming really good at your hobby, really intelligent, really good at any number of things, like things that you actually genuinely enjoy.
Which, by the way, is the kind of man a woman actually tends to like more.
Yes. And also, like, Tate was just obsessed with this one conception of masculinity. And he literally said to me the first time I spoke to him on the phone, what I'm selling is the James Bond lifestyle. I think it's like more the James Bond of back in the day, not so much Daniel Craig, but like he lent into the fact.
Our good woke James Bond, Daniel Craig. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
But he was very aware of what he was doing. It wasn't this accidental thing. And I think that's something that gets missed a lot of the time. When people talk about Tate becoming so famous, they go, what does that reflect about us, that we were drawn to a guy like this, that so many young men like found this guy a role model? I don't think it's so much a reflection on young men. Like, obviously there are particular issues that they're facing, but it also just shows you how good he was at marketing and how good he was at manipulating social media to get that message out there. It's not that Tate is necessarily a reflection of us. I think he shaped us in a way as well. It's a bit of both.
Yeah, but you know, like all young boys and men pretty much go through a sexist period when they're trying to prove themselves to other men, when they haven't yet matured, they haven't yet realized that women are people necessarily, because they've been in long-term relationships or had female friends or worked in a work setting where you have to work with other women, and you know, all that levels out. But you can't blame young men for falling for this marketing, because they're young. They're young. You know, like when I was that age, I literally had a poster in my room which was like a picture of an alien smoking a spliff, and it said, "Take me to your dealer," and I had never even like seen weed. Like, that is the kind of things that young men do. Like, of course they're gonna fall for this shit, right?
Yeah.
But what the dangerous thing is that they're not maturing out of that now, because they have a political philosophy, a political movement to attach themselves to. So those views, those misogynist, sexist views, are now carrying into adulthood.
And I guess if you kind of start with the relatively benign self-help side of things, which is, you know, not just a Tateism, whether it's like Jordan Peterson or any other kind of online intellectual, where it's kind of like, you know, make your bed in the morning. Why don't you go to the gym? All of which is like relatively useful, normal advice for men, right? Like, you can't say, oh my God, you're telling the guys to make their beds in the morning. This is like fucking manosphere, red pill shit. That gets people through the door of going, actually, yeah, you know what? I am a little bit of a layabout. I do need to kind of get a hold of things. But then when that messaging starts to turn into, you know, a woman should have the amount of people she slept with tattooed on her forehead, like...
But also, why are those two bits of advice male specific? Go to the gym and make your bed.
This is what I always found interesting with him. He like people point out these like they go, oh, he says a lot of mad stuff, but what about this? He says this very reasonable thing. It's all the most obvious shit imaginable. Like half of it is on the NHS website for like how to deal with feeling depressed.
It's less really, sexy though, isn't it?
It's really not very novel. But like you said
about most self-help though, right? Like you know, self-help books have been written for like since the Victorian era, and broadly speaking, it's the same thing. It's like smile more, remember people's names, like work out. It's not like revelatory stuff.
And to be honest, like we met young men who, in very small aspects of their lives, if you looked at it, you could argue Tate did make some minor improvement. There was one war room member we met who said before he met Andrew Tate, he would sit around playing video games all day. He would enjoy it while he was doing it, but he'd go to bed depressed because he felt like his life had no meaning. That's not a great space to be in. And Andrew Tate, he says, did help him get out of that. But along with it came a ton of misogynistic views. The idea that he could make money on webcam, that's a big message that Andrew Tate teaches to all of his sort of close followers. And
webcam sex
work, sorry, yes.
Getting women to do webcam sex.
And it's like, it's not really a great trade-off. There are so many more role models out there who will tell you how to improve your life. And they don't come with a whole fucking cartload of the most misogynistic views you've ever heard.
Yeah. And where I think it gets dangerous is when this idea of, well, men clearly are looking for a role model. That's why they're getting into Andrew Tate. Clearly they're not making their beds, going to the gym and sorting their life out. So they need some kind of role model. Fine. So do women. You know, everyone does. But where it becomes dangerous is where that argument bleeds into this idea that men are somehow, the pendulum swung the other way and men are now basically left behind by society. The kind of Scott Gallowayification of this, which is this idea that, well, actually, we got to be careful because men now are, you know, are not as successful in higher education or whatever. But that is a little bit bullshit because we still live in a world where, you know, in this country, less than 1 in 10 CEOs are women. You know, fewer than 15% of landholders in the world are women. You know, rape and sexual assault are on the rise. So this idea that like, oh, well, we do actually really need to be really careful about the idea, this concept of men being on the back foot now and how we help them. It sometimes bleeds into the wrong argument, I think. It's this stuff is dangerous. This kind of patriarchal misogyny is dangerous. It has nothing to do with helping men. It has to do, for Tate, with selling his courses.
It's financial gain. Tell me, you mentioned a couple of answers ago talking about how he kind of never really matured beyond that sort of 12-year-old type, sort of like what you would call like key stage 1 or like entry-level misogyny, right? That most normal men do progress beyond. Why do you think he never did?
So there's a lot of potential reasons for that. I think we have a chapter in the book about Andrew Tate's father. Tate's father is really the founder of Tateism, and that's a word that both Tate and his father actually use. He was discharged from the military potentially for what the military said was a narcissistic personality disorder, which he denied he had. And, the Tates really look up to their father. Their father tweeted a lot of misogynistic, homophobic things in his time. There was a lack of role model for them in what kind of man to be.
I think it was the type of role model they had. Again, like off the camera conversation I had with Tate in the early days, he was talking about his dad and he said, you know, my dad left my mum to go around the world and play in chess tournaments and fuck loads of women all around the world. And I thought he was a fucking G for that. I thought he was a G, which is such like a novel way to view your father. I think like if my dad left my mum to go and sleep with numerous women all around the world, I don't know if I'd necessarily have that kind of response. But I think it was the only way he could keep this image of his dad as this amazing man, this hero. It was the only way he could understand the choices his dad was making was actually that's the right thing for a man to do. And he's kind of followed in that footstep. And then I also don't think they had, from our understanding, they didn't have a huge amount of female friends growing up. They were in very like isolated male environments. They had that relationship with their dad, but they also spent a lot of their time in the gym, surrounded by other men. They didn't have normal male-female relationships. But
then also the thing that radicalized that was the reflection back to them by the audience they found on first reality television. Andrew Tate was on Big Brother. Tristan was on a reality show too. then then social media became the thing that reflected back to them like, no, we like this and we'll give you more attention, the more obnoxious and the more you stay within that 12-year-old misogynistic mindset. So the exact same process that happened to Trump, first reality television, then social media, almost radicalizing the person through audience feedback is one thing that made Tate who he was.
Audience capture, maybe.
Audience capture, yeah.
So, okay. Conversations about, we've talked about role models quite a few times here, whether it's the lack of a positive male role model in Andrew and Tristan Tate's childhood, whether it's female role models in their lives, other just women to be friends with, and possibly with the guys who find his message appealing, a lack of alternate positive male role models that they can turn to who will tell them to make their bed in the morning, but then don't transition to the extreme misogyny. Is it as simple as that? If we were to talk about how do we speak to these blokes, how do we address what's going on in their lives, and how do we kind of give them the toolkit to be able to engage with the world that doesn't provide the easy answers of like basically feminists have made your life incredibly hard and difficult? Is it as simple as having more positive male role models? Because that feels, well, simplistic.
Yeah.
I don't think that we've lost positive male role models. I think we've gained a huge amount of negative male role models constantly being blasted in children's faces through social media. I think it's more about getting rid of the access young people have to unfettered characters like Tate.
But it's also like social media gives you a direct financial incentive to become someone like Tate, particularly with like what Musk has done to Twitter or X, this idea that like you get revenue, but it's entirely based on engagement. It doesn't matter about the quality or what you're actually posting. It's just about engagement. And that gives you this incentive to just seek engagement at any cost. There's no nuance. There's no actual belief system underpinning any of it. People just say things for engagement. And you can look at any of those guys on like the hard right, alt-right, manosphere section of the internet. They change their views the whole time to just support the most inflammatory thing they possibly can. I mean, yesterday we saw them all talking about how Haitians are eating cats and dogs in Springfield, and then Trump picks it up on the podium. But they're just looking for engagement by any means. And I think until we figure out that particular issue surrounding by social media, it's just going to be full of grifters constantly.
It really is. Sorry to sound like cliche, but it is social media. Like I think increasingly we're realizing just how terrible social media is. You know, and yes, the media has its issues. It gets things wrong. There's certainly biases there, but overall, it is judged according to a set of laws and ethics. Whereas social media is just an orbit of absolute bullshit that sucks up young people into it.
I also think it's part of the fact that like media, traditional media, whatever you want to call it, in the early days of social media, they were all rushing to like intertwine with it. Everyone wanted all of their content on Facebook, Instagram, like how we get social engagement as a news organization was a huge thing. And that has kind of caused this change in particularly young people's perceptions of how they view social media. Like I grew up with social media, but when I was growing up with it, it was a way to interact with friends. It wasn't a news source. I never went there for news. Whereas now when you talk to young people about Twitter or X, they go, oh, it's a news website. It's not. It's a bunch of unqualified people posting opinions. There's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine to have a platform like that. But that we live in a world where people can't tell the difference between that and news, which abides by Ofcom standards, legal regulations, has to go through a bunch. Like I can't tell you the amount of lawyers we have to speak to.
And that's why we can't compete with it, because every little word that we say in any documentary or article we do, as you know, gets rigorously fact checked, and we get taken to town by lawyers on everything, and it takes us a very long time and a considerable amount of money to make a film and then to put it out because it has to be so accurate. And then it gets viewed by 2 million people if we're lucky. Joe Rogan can go on his podcast and say like, oh, Andrew Tate says some wise things. I don't know if I believe the Vice documentary, and that gets viewed 60 million times, and he can just say whatever the hell he wants. We cannot compete with it unless we regulate it.
Yeah, you're almost, it's David and Goliath. I don't like, you've just got.
Who's the David now?
Yeah. No, well, exactly.
Like David.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying.
Oh,
it's
right,
like you've got the cage fight, the Fear Factor guy who does the UFC commentary, like getting stoned and chatting breeze on his podcast.
Yeah.
But quite possibly, particularly the audience, right? Young men are listening to that, and they probably pay more attention to what he says than the fact check.
Like, definitely.
Yeah.
But probably about it. They definitely do.
But like that's fine. Like smoke weed and chat shit like about conspiracy theories in a funny way or whatever. But when you start presenting yourself as someone who actually has like knowledge about things, and you're actually talking about news events, you should be held accountable if you lie or say something inaccurate.
Yeah, I don't think doesn't sound like a particularly controversial statement, right?
I know. Yeah, I know. But that is, I mean, that's the world we live in.
So you both went, and for a lot of the blokes that go, some of them feel like, I wouldn't say it's like a transcendental experience, but they certainly feel like they get something out of, from Tate, from the self-help, from the test, from the war room. Could you tell me about your personal experiences, like not just as journalists, but actual as participants, as people who were there, like, and if you don't mind, sort of doing that within the framing of your own sort of sense of self and masculinity?
I think you first, because I was more just looking at everything you were doing through a camera.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, I mean, like all men who aren't lying, I have at times been insecure about my own masculinity, right?
You're weak!
Yeah, exactly. And, of course, the idea of going through like a fight with a professional MMA fighter. I'm saying fight obviously because it was more just like me getting the shit kicked out of me by a professional MMA fighter, and coming through that the other end. That feels good. You feel like I'm able to do something. I've exceeded my own expectations. And there is a world in which some sort of ritual that makes men or anyone feel more confident about themselves is a good thing. It's attached to a very dangerous message though, and I think ultimately there was this final moment where I was kind of doorstepping Andrew and Tristan on the way to the courthouse as they were there to receive a formal indictment for allegations of trafficking women and grooming them, allegations which they deny, where I just saw them like walking off with their like tight like shirts, their muscles like bulging out, like smoking a cigar and like shoving reporters out of the way while they go to face their sex trafficking indictment. And I just thought, actually, I'm all right. Like that, if that's what like masculinity is, then masculinity is just basically a ridiculous cartoon performance to other men that I literally want nothing to do with. And by the way, like the other lie that lots of young men are being told by these men is that women will like you more if you do that. And I know that's not the main message here. The main message is this is damaging to men and women. But if you're getting into this because you think like chicks are gonna like you if you act like that, like it's not gonna work. They will laugh at you because it's ridiculous. I mean, look at these guys. They're a cartoon.
Sorry, I'll talk to you about it, AJ, but Matt, you just, even the way you've described it there, right, there's like, I can sense there's kind of like a hesitancy or a sensitivity around almost admitting that you feel like you got something out of that process. Do you see what I'm saying? That like, you almost don't want to admit that like getting roughed up was like a moment of epiphany.
No, sure. Like go like everyone go join like a boxing gym and experience that, or anything. Challenge yourself. Go bungee jumping. Like do something difficult. Like push yourself. Generally, yeah, it's a great thing to be involved in. And maybe we don't have that ritual in modern society. That's probably what Tate's like shamanic guru people would say. We've lost the ritual where the boy becomes the man. But I obviously. Part of me wanted to prove to the Tates and to anyone watching the film that I could do that. But that is the insecurity about my own masculinity that every other man's feeling, that Tate is prying open and trying to get inside. And, there are many other achievements in my life that I'm much more proud of than getting the shit kicked out of me by a Romanian MMA fighter in front of Andrew Tate.
No way.
That have made me feel more confident as a man and more proud of myself.
Jamie, tell me about your experience, but also could you tell me about observing that?
The observing that was actually probably the most stressful part of it for me, because I was just constantly worried that Matt was going to get like knocked out. To an extent, we have very little control over the situation. Right? I didn't want him to do it, if I'm being honest. I was like, you're an idiot if you do this. We're in the middle of a forest in Transylvania. You've got these guys who already hate you, who are picking who is going to fight you. and I can't do anything once that fight starts. Luckily, it ended fine. But I think like I had a slightly different experience from Matt because I think I was just slightly more detached from everything. I'm behind cameras. I'm having to talk to Andrew and Tristan behind the scene, lots of planning. And I think from a zoomed out perspective, what you said was very true. Like if you want to zoom out, the basic message of that event was like, if you overcome fears in your life, you might actually get something out of it, which I think is fundamentally true, right? That's something we all learn as people growing up. Like sometimes things are really scary. You don't want to do them. You do them. Actually, it was good in the end. You learned something from it. And now you can do it going forward. What I found really interesting about the men we met there was that they kind of superficially believed that was the reason why they were there, to become better men. But really, it wasn't true because they already all thought they were the absolute pinnacles of masculinity, right? They were actually doing it because they wanted to prove to Andrew Tate that they're very brave, masculine men. It's not about proving to themselves. It was always, always about proving to Andrew Tate that I'm just like you. I can be just like you. Your teachings are working. And I think that's where you can end up in a really, really dangerous position because you're not doing things to actually make an improvement in your life. You've actually just deified another individual and you'll do whatever you think that person would approve of you doing. You're no longer thinking as an individual person. You're just trying to please this guy, Andrew Tate, which is insane.
That's where it becomes cult-like.
It's really cult-like.
And you got to think of the message here. It's not. If say it was like a self-help group and it was like, all right, everyone come to Romania and you're gonna do some crazy test and it's like bungee jumping and then you did it, like, you know, amazing, and then you feel amazing about yourself. That would be one thing. But the end goal is to prove that you must, as a man, be able to physically dominate other men and commit violence, otherwise you're lesser than other men. Boxing and combat sports are obviously great and beneficial for women and men who choose to get involved in them, as is any sport. I mean, I do find it a little weird that nowadays everyone's obsessed with combat sports instead of, you know, normal sports like football. But anyway, like,
I totally agree with that.
Do you know what I mean? Like, what, like
the explosion of like jiu-jitsu, the fact that now like media companies organize like white collar boxing matches where like their salespeople fight each other. I read a great piece in the FT last weekend where it's called The Pit, where there's this group called Spartan and they just do bare knuckle boxing in like an 8 foot with hay bales.
Pit fighting.
And by the way, I think this is way more central to the right than we are all acknowledging, because remember, Trump went to a UFC fight with Dana White, the guy who like
owns the
UFC. And then did like a podcast with Logan Paul or whatever. You know, he knows what he's doing. There's a pipeline from combat sports to the right wing, which is a shame because, you know, these are genuine sports and they're nothing to do with being dominant and being right wing. You know,
there's actually something really interesting. I don't know how into the UFC you guys are, but there's a British fighter called Molly McCann, and typically the American fighters that like invoke politics do it in like a MAGA pro-Trump way, right? You know, so it's like there's a fighter called Colby Covington who's like a massive Trump guy. It's actually all an act. He plays a heel, but he's fighting like he did fight a black champion who fights in the name of Kamaru Usman, but he was calling him like Marty. He was like anglicizing his name and basically being like, you know, calling into question his ethnicity. However, this British fighter, Molly McCann, she wins and she gets the whole of the O2 chanting "fuck the Tories," right? Because she's like Scouse. You don't need to be a genius to like a Scouse cage fighter is probably not going to have like particularly right-wing politics, And it was really interesting to me the kind of inversion of the politics that like the British fighters have in the UFC. Same with Paddy the Baddy, who's kind of a very high-profile fighter. Again, he's like rabidly anti-Tory as a Scouse, and I don't have much more of a thought-out take on it than that, but I just find it interesting the way that it doesn't necessarily conform to the same political typecast the way that the American fighters do.
Right, absolutely. And it traditionally is a working-class sport, boxing, and it's not for like guys with Bugattis who own like multiple international companies.
I mean, also the fact that like Dana White is obviously like pretty right wing. He endorsed Trump at the RNC. Like, I think part of it will probably be like fighters just trying to appeal to the boss man.
The boss man. And I do. But I also do think that the stats coming out of America right now, that young men are moving towards Trump, are worrying. And Trump, when he goes to the UFC fight with Dana White, knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same with the podcast appearances.
He's got a great media strategy.
Yes.
I actually like sometimes question how much Barron Trump gave him some advice, because like Barron Trump's supposed to be good friends with Aiden Ross. Like if you watch that Aiden Ross stream Trump does.
I can't believe Trump has been, this is something people don't talk enough. He's been on a podcast with Aiden Ross. Aiden Ross is like the number one Andrew Tate sycophant. This is a sycophant of a
famous,
man, of a man who is accused of trafficking women, which he denies, and Trump's just happy to go on his podcast.
I mean, the second interview Aiden Ross ever did with Andrew Tate, when Tate got up and left the room, he sniffed the chair. And now this guy's interviewing a former president who very may well be the next president of the United States.
And misogyny is a huge part of it. I mean, look at the tweet that the message that Trump put out, which I don't even want to get into because it was so misogynistic, about comparing Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris based on their sex lives. I mean, that is the way right-wing politics is going. Gender is the battleground. Misogyny is the way to win young men's votes.
I mean, the war room members, like, we managed to get hold of some messages through sources that we had that basically showed them chatting in their Telegram groups. And you see them talking about the 2024 election. This is back in 2022. And they're calling it the gender election. They're like, this will be a war on gender. This is what is going to matter in the election. And depressingly, it is a big factor in the election now.
Yep.
Yeah, reproductive rights, particularly, obviously massive for the States. And I think it's going to come down to whether or not Trump can mobilize sort of like Midwestern white women to vote for him in big enough numbers to kind of counteract.
Yeah, because he's got the incels.
Yeah, he's got that sewn up.
Yeah, he does. And and that incel, where that bleeds into a right-wing philosophy, and where you find that in right-wing pundits as well, mainstream ones, is this idea that women have too much choice now available to them for what kind of partner they choose. And therefore men who aren't like the super dominant alpha have less choice of partners. And so that freedom that women have to literally choose their partner, which I think is a pretty basic, freedom.
They've got too much choice.
Yeah, is somehow like messing up our society and meaning that like lots of young men aren't getting
They have this, particularly more the incel groups than the Andrew Tate manosphere section, but they have this insane belief that because of women having too much choice, we now have this situation where like 10% of the men are having sex with 90% of the women.
Which is not true.
Not true. You just want to tell them, like, you're just in the percentage that's having sex with no women. Like, you don't need to rationalize this by saying all men aren't having sex with women. They are. Just, like, stop being awful, and it might happen to you.
There's always been, the bragging. There's always been a gap between the amount of sex with women men are actually having and the amount of sex with women they say they're having, and the jealousy has always been a thing since time immemorial.
And what they believe other men.
And what they believe other men are having. And again, Tate's whole thing, his whole marketing thing is I'm having sex with lots of women. So, but there's always been that. But now that has become politicized.
So we hear this phrase, right? The sexual marketplace, right?
Yeah.
Is it correct to understand that as kind of like an almost extension of neoliberal politics, of the kind of the individualism and sort of being caressed by the invisible hand of the sexual marketplace? Am I over intellectualizing?
No. I think it has. The sexual marketplace, there's the haves and the have-nots. There's the guys getting all the girls and the guys who aren't. Is a myth, really. I mean, to put it bluntly, like unattractive men are still having like sex with women as well. And it's not the case that just one small amount of attractive men are having all the sex. That's what people believe. A lot of this because
Chads and Stacys, the
Chads and Stacys, right? A lot of this because the statistics come from Tinder, and Tinder is mainly men, so that's a hugely skewed sample size. But yeah, it's just not the case.
What do you make of that, Jamie? This kind of is there a political bent to the kind of this sexual marketplace analysis? Is it right to sort of say that it's an extension of that kind of neoliberal, maybe not libertarian, but that the politics extend that far?
I think it kind of weirdly blends into like hyper capitalism and consumerism in a sense. Like a lot of Tate's teachings and the people that follow him, it's because they're like obsessed with having like the most money, the most wealth, the most smart, the most supercars. And because they also view women essentially as objects, they're also obsessed with just having the most women. Again, it comes back to that idea of just status signaling. I think if you talk to like your average person, they're not thinking about the sexual marketplace. They're probably thinking about the one or two specific people that they may or may not have a crush on. And like, can I ask that person out? Can we go for a coffee? It's only these sort of like, unfortunately, like really indoctrinated, lost individuals who even think in those terms. Like, it's not a normal way to approach life. And I do think it comes. I do think it comes from this obsession with just like, you prove you're the best by having the most of everything, and that includes women for these guys. Like Tate thinks he's better than us because he slept with more women and he has more money and he has more cars.
Yeah.
If that's how you view the world, then fine, but I don't think that really proves anything.
And yes, there is something like hyper-capitalist about that.
Yeah. It's quite the way you say that. It's a bit of a red flag if someone has spent any time thinking about the sexual marketplace.
Awful red flag. But the depressing thing now is like, it's not like the manosphere has been around forever, right? When I was at school, I'm sure there was one kid in my year who read manosphere stuff and was interested in red pilling or read The Game, any of those sorts of...
I read The Game.
Exactly.
Teenager.
There were people that were interested in it, right? Now, it's not just people, it's a huge amount of young men who are thinking about it, spending time mulling over it. It's not just a few guys in the group who might be a bit intellectually curious or maybe are struggling with women and looking for an answer. It's a huge amount of young men and they're obsessed with it.
And also, you read The Game, and I'll make a presumption here. Perhaps you read it purely for academic purposes, but you probably...
I was a 15-year-old boy. There's not very much academia going on.
Yeah, you read The Game probably because you wanted to get laid.
Yeah.
These guys are following Andrew Tate and consuming his red pill stuff because they want to get laid, but then also the fact that they're not getting laid is turning into this kind of politicized anger around women having too much freedom. Which is worrying. Yeah. And then that's The Game doesn't say like we need to roll back on women's rights, does it?
No.
Yeah. So it's changed. It's become political.
And the really dark extrapolation of that, I think, particularly when you look at like the War Room or like Andrew Tate's most loyal followers, the guys who are really in there, is like they're not doing it to have sex. They're doing it to have sex in order to then make money. There's actually, in those messages we spoke about...
To impress other men.
Yeah, essentially. But it comes down to hyper-capitalism, right? These guys want the women because they see them as a means to making more money. And there's messages between them where I think one guy says to Iggy Semmelweis, who's like this high priest figure in the War Room, he says like, we're here to make money and get laid. And Iggy goes, no, we're here to get laid to then make money.
But this is because... The philosophy of the War Room is it teaches you how to gradually manipulate women into becoming, in their words, sex slaves who will webcam and perform for you, perform for customers so you can take their money. So that kind of e-pimping is the ultimate goal of the Andrew Tate cult.
Yeah. So the women they're telling you to seek out in these corsets, he's like, you need to find women who are susceptible to our methods. You want to find women who are insecure,
and just
isolated.
To be clear, that version of like gender apartheid where women are slaves that like are doing sex work in order to make money for us men is actually worse than the Taliban, right? And that group, that extremist ideology is the most popular ideology, the most popular extreme group right now for young people around the world today. You know, this form of extremism is arguably the most dangerous form of extremism in the Western world today. But because it's women, not any sort of, for example, if it was a minority that they were arguing we should have an apartheid over, I think there would be a lot more attention, a lot more counter-extremism work being done towards it. But because it's women, it's almost like, but that's the way of the world, you know? And it's incredibly worrying.
Yeah. I think we said that a lot. Like if you told someone there's this group of like thousands of men or hundreds of men and they're spending all their time sitting around talking about how they could subjugate Jewish people or Muslim people or black people, you'd be up in arms. Police would be investigating. Yeah. But because it's women, it's kind of seen as like, oh, this social phenomenon. What do we do about it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a social phenomenon. Yeah, and there's some like,
what's going on with the men? Are they okay?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, no, they're trying to start a cult to enslave women.
Yeah, it's quite serious.
They're not doing great.
Yeah, and they're not, obviously,
You mentioned anger. Tell me about the reaction to the film. What happens like after it gets published? And I guess in a way what you're expecting to happen once the book sort of gets out there.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to sound really bad, but like I'm behind the camera. Matt is the face on the films. He does become a vector for a huge amount of the anger. I got like some death threats, some...
Very brave of you to come on camera now, Jim.
Yeah. Huge mistake, this.
Yeah, but this is the Tate thing. Conquer your fear. Put yourself out there. Receive the death threats.
I'm a man now. So like I got some abuse. I got lots of very angry phone calls and messages from Andrew Tate himself. But I think you were really the focus of like quite a massive harassment campaign.
Yeah, but I think it's important to remember that harassment campaign is also coordinated. Like, yes, there's, hundreds of death threats and like, I don't know, my girlfriend has had messages being like, your boyfriend's a dork or whatever. And she's
like, yeah, he actually is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that was one, like, they created this moniker. This moniker
my
to troll
girlfriend came up
Matt.
to me, she was like, Matt, I have to tell you something. Someone messaged me on Instagram to say that you're a dork. And I'm like, oh, okay.
But he kept being like, that Matt Shea, he's just a dork, a nerd, and a geek. And I remember thinking, Matt would probably call himself all of those things.
What?
Are those really negative? Okay,
Yes.
dork's not great.
That's not the line that we're taking.
I think nerd and geek are quite good. If someone calls me a nerd, I'll be like, that's great. Yeah, I love to nerd out about the things I'm interested in.
I'm a jock. No, okay. Okay.
You guys got it all wrong.
Look, I know I'm not a jock.
I am a Chad.
I wouldn't say I'm a dork, nerd, geek.
You're a Sigma.
I would say that the insult is itself lame.
Yeah.
Yes.
I sound really bitter, don't I?
Yeah. You took that quite personally.
This man is intellectually inferior to me.
No, if someone's like coordinating like a mass social media campaign to call you like a dork, a nerd, and a geek, then you've probably really pissed them off, which is a good thing, I think. I don't know. I mean, the really interesting thing is the ones that come up to me in real life. Like, I've had like 4 or 5 Uber drivers, people who work in airport security come up and they really think that because Tate has released his own documentary about our work, and sorry for the people just listening, I did air quotes around the word documentary. He released his own quote documentary about us, and he's released his own narrative that our research has been quote debunked, and that the women are paid actresses or whatever,
or AI,
or AI
don't even exist. Any of these things.
And what's really interesting is all the men that come up to me, they really want to genuinely discuss this, but they think that our documentary's been. They believe that. They believe it's been. They've been like, how is it? You've been completely humiliated and everything's been disproven. And I'm like, oh my god, you all actually think this because you are getting your news not from watching my film, but from watching. From following Tate on Twitter or whatever.
That's my favorite one. I've been with you a few times where people have come up and asked like questions. You go, did you see the film? They go, I watched some clips.
Yeah, they've watched the clips that Tate put out
Yeah.
with his content. And that is what's worrying. I'm really worried about social media, I have to say. Like the amount of people who just, they literally just think that it's all been disproven because they've read that on Twitter is crazy. And also, just probably worth mentioning, Tate's role in the recent race riots. I mean, he had some of the most viewed conspiracy theory tweets about this. Yeah. And that's the other thing is this isn't just dangerous because it's misogynistic. It's dangerous because it undermines young people's trust in institutions, in the media, in democracy itself. Because the other thing Tate continuously says is, everyone's lying to you. It's all
the
conspiracy.
Matrix,
yeah.
The Matrix, yeah.
This might be a question to nothing. I appreciate you're both reporters and journalists and not self-help gurus. But here goes. What have you learned about masculinity and possibly like a positive vision of masculinity as a result of doing this? I know we've kind of spoken about this in kind of a roundabout way over the course of the interview. How has this informed your sense of like what it means to be a man?
See, I'm in two minds of this. The one mind I want to say, being a man is about helping and protecting others and being strong and not abusing and sex trafficking others. So the opposite of Andrew Tate. Or I want to say, do self-improvement, do sports, go to the gym, whatever. All that stuff's great. But then I also think stop obsessing over masculinity. Like it's a weird way to obsess over how to improve yourself. Fine, you want to make more money, great. You want to be better at sports, whatever. Yeah, fine, whatever. But like, why attach those things to masculinity? It's weird. Like, you don't need to do that. Most grown men who are probably what most people describe as traditionally masculine don't go around all day thinking like, is it more masculine if I do like boxing or football? Like, is it more masculine if I wear this or that? Like, if you're asking that question, you probably are, that's probably the issue. If you're constantly obsessing over that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of something that Tate said to all of the men at the War Room. He made this big distinction about being a good man and a good person. And he kind of rails on the fact that like you can be a good person, but that doesn't necessarily make you a good man. Being a good man is something completely different. And I think what I kind of I mean, I'm probably going to get called like a liberal snowflake, incredibly woke
You
for
are.
saying this. I know, yeah. It is
And
what
a
it is.
cuck.
And a cuck. I've been called a
Calling
cuck
me a
many
DNG,
times, don't
so-
worry. But like, I think just focus on viewing your life in terms of like, am I a good person? It's kind of the same as your answer. Don't obsess about
But
masculinity.
you can also be a strong. You can choose to want to be a strong person, a rich person.
But so could my argument could be like, so could any woman. Like I know
exactly.
I've got female friends who smash the gym and would probably destroy me in an arm wrestle.
Exactly.
But, like,
of course. Yeah, but of course, there's biological differences, but there's so much overlap. Like, it doesn't really make sense to look at things in the context of gender, and to a degree. I mean, the advice to help someone and the issues that are affecting us are affecting both genders.
Do you think is what you've just said there consistent with what we were just saying about, for example, the American election, where we're talking about how gender is like super relevant to the electoral politics there? Or
By those using it to get votes,
Yeah.
by those manipulating the discussion to get ahead. I mean, to put it another way, you look at Trump. Trump is definitely speaking to men. Is Kamala speaking specifically to women, or are her policies things that would benefit everyone?
would you make the same argument to a feminist that we should think about gender less?
No, because the difference is, again, like I said, we do live in a world where, for example, fewer than 15% of landholders are women, less than 1 in 10 CEOs are women. Rape and like every single person who's listening to this will know someone who's been sexually assaulted or raped. Those will be women for the most part by men. That is the world we still live in. So yes, I think it is still there's a big fight still to be had for equality of the sexes. But yeah,
Chaps, the film's great, the book's great. Clown World, 4 years inside Andrew Tate's manosphere. Thank you so much for coming in to talk to us. I really appreciate it. It's been fucking fascinating. Thank you so
you.
much.
Thanks
thanks for
great.
having us. Thank you.
Really
Cheers.
appreciate it.